Good morning. I will be responding to the whole papers as I received them, so I may say some things that are responses to things you haven't heard. It's all very religious. These papers are interesting to me as a theologian because of the theological imagery they employ. As a Catholic married to a Jewish woman, raising our daughter Jewish, because of the invocations of Jewish and Christian convergences in all three papers. You didn't get to hear that in its fullness necessarily in the papers as presented. And because even though I write almost exclusively about faith and contemporary culture, I gave up my television 7 years ago. I have never seen any of the shows mentioned today or this whole conference. Thus, I learned a great deal very quickly from these papers. Assuming that what will be most helpful is, as the candidates say, drawing contrasts, I would like to briefly reflect on the spiritual and political rhetorics of these three papers. There is something of a push for theological closure, I notice, in these analyses. Right? There seems to be a background view that there is such a thing as Catholicism, a biblical worldview, or a coherent Christian or Jewish tradition or identity against and through which a hermeneutics of television can be played. As in some other academic writing on television and also film, there seems to be something of a need to cast religious categories as more or less stable or coherent or singular, despite the intention that you introduced at the very beginning, with which I'm in tremendous sympathy. In some ways, popular culture writing in religion is the new systematic theology. Right at the time when systematic theology is being actually given up in Christian theology in favor of what we now call constructive theology, the idea that all of our positions are invented in religion for particular strategic purposes to solve political problems, right? And not reports about reality. Not reports about revealed reality, let's say. This theological systematization of television shows can be seen in the way contingent theological and religious constellations are portrayed as pretty solid theologically, whether in Leonard's paper in a separation between Catholic uniculture played off, I presume, against a Roman Catholic monoculture, although we could talk about that. In Vincent Brooks's paper, the specter of syncretism that figures what it may be proper or improper for a Jewish or Christian character to believe or to practice. Indeed, in a part of his paper that Vincent didn't read, to be positioned, what I notice about his discussion of intermarriage, is to be positioned by the discourse of intermarriage is to be made to picture yourself as having one religious identity, married to someone who has one religious identity. He even spoke of the show fostering religious consciousness and interfaith understanding. This despite his positive stance toward the creativities of Jewish-Christian marriage. And in Marcia Dawkins' recitations, it didn't come out so much in the presentation, it's more in her chapter, Marcia Dawkins' recitations of Pauline scriptures, as if Pauline scriptures yield a fairly clear theology of faith over against works, or a fairly coherent sense of the body of Christ. This is all contested quite deeply now in Christian theology. Right? This despite the creativity of setting Paul next to Robert Bella's civil religion. In other words, I sense a certain settledness, despite, again, the intentions, a certain settledness about religious categories and identities. My point is actually not so much the individual instances here, but that this seems typically to be a way of proceeding in such analyses. And I think this might be a strategy. Right? I'm not saying they're wrong, therefore they're wrong. Right? I'm saying this might be a strategy, an instructive strategy, that pointing to something else happening. I also notice an ambivalence in the papers about television's relevance to larger socio-political issues. The West Wing is said to both represent and negotiate Catholic identity, but it's hard to say how much of which is going on. Everwood and the OC, on the one hand, distract, as Vincent's paper says, from complex religious issues, yet they can also rehearse, a phrase I really like, appreciate, rehearse a possible religious future. Prison Break might keep viewers in suspended fantasy, as Marcia says so well, between television and the world beyond, and yet it intervenes politically through its invested communities, presumably academics and fans, or academics as fans. All the papers speculate about fan attachments, speculate to these shows, but step back from making any durable link to fan publics. I wonder then, can television shows bear theological multiplicity, to use a recent term Laura Schneider uses in her book? Theological multiplicity. Can television shows bear multiple, plural religious logics within themselves that are contradictory and even incomprehensible? I wonder, can theology itself get undermined or dispossessed of its specialness by a critical television analysis, right? Instead of the categories just being reframed but kept? What saves these serious and scholarly forms of analysis from repeating the ambivalences they all observe about television's impact on justice? Right? Especially since this seems to be culturally and religiously important television. Is there anything different or distinctive about the vocation to scholarship in media and religion? I cannot help but ask this question, because these three papers seem to be written as acts of survival, witnesses to survival. Survival shown in the poignancy of confronting God with the church doors sealed and an angry cigarette near the altar. Quoting Leonard, individuals no doubt respond. The theological speculation is fascinating. Individuals no doubt respond because they are witness to a private conversation akin to one they may have had with their own deity. Survival shown in discovering a new interfaith relational identity. In Vincent's paper, in the midst of tension and even ostracism, he talks about, from one's ethnic religious community. And yet he concludes with the melancholy claim, interfaith marriage is not a lost cause. Survival of American indifference, racism, and punishment, shown in the call to hope more publicly through a strong critique of the U.S. prison system, much more strongly in her paper than it came out in the presentation, and the United States itself. In a scholarly analysis in which Marcia claims, quote, I, for one, have a little faith that television drama can be part of the solution to these problems, that is to say, can make a political intervention. The scholarly task, she says, yields, through her work, quote, a powerful religious vision for day-to-day life, unquote. It turns out that like Paul, the Jewish Paul, the Christian Paul, each of our three presenters are also evangelizers of a sort. I ask, what do these investments, the rhetorics of theological knowledge that I briefly mentioned, as well as the evident fandoms and religious and political commitments all three scholars seem to share, what do these horizons for your work mean for the distinctiveness of the vocation of the scholar of religion and media? I suppose I am wondering about the ethics of analysis of religion and media. Are our writings not also comprehensible in, to use my language, comprehensible as spiritual exercises or disciplines that we do or that are done to us or through us? For scholars who are also fans of what we write about, also politically concerned. Such unavowed weights in the writing that I noticed today. A bit too much televisual theological coherence. A tad noticeable stabilizing of